I mean, it was fun. I can't say there was well, there were probably days that I wished I didn't have to go to work, but they were few and far between. It was a fun industry, um, great people. The people that we retailed to were without exception awesome. Um, I mean, it was. I think brewing is an interesting business because people are happy. People are enjoyed what they do. Um, it's a kind of a feel good industry. So I miss the people, miss the staff. So it was a good time.
If we take a longer view of craft beer in Edmonton, the story is more about failure than it is success. Success is a more recent arrival to the beer scene in this city. Um, in the mid 1980s, where we started to see Big Rock and Granville Island and some of the pioneers of the Canadian craft beer scene get up and running, there were efforts in Edmonton to try and open small craft breweries here in town. Strathcona Brewing, which then turned into Flanagan's and Sons. There was a brew pub downtown. There was a brew pub out in the West End. There was a brew pub on the South Side. All of them failed. They didn't last more than a couple of years, right? And so that was a hard time to open a brewery. People didn't really understand craft beer, and so these were really brave pioneers trying to blaze a trail without success. I think the first brewery in Edmonton to actually find a way to make a go of it was Alley Cat, and Neil Herbst and his partners. Laid off from got a package from the provincial government, turned that package into the startup money he needed to do this brewery, and I think he did it the right way. So he was the first. He was the trail. He was the first that kind of could actually make it work. Brewster's had a brewery in the Oliver Square district up until a few years ago. But that was a Calgary operation opening a new brewery in Edmonton, right? So Alley Cat really, I think, is the godfather of Edmonton brewing, and they did it with a very specific business model, and it was a business model that came to be what marked the 1990s and the early 2000s in terms of how do you want your brewery to succeed. And you have 3 or 4 core beer, a light lagery type thing, a dark brown ale kind of thing, right? Something kind of hoppy. And then, and this one's particularly important, something fruity, right? And so Apricot quickly took off for Alley Cat, helped them keep the lights on in the lean years. So what was interesting with their model is the bulk of their sales are always around, continue to be around their fruit beer, whether it be the main squeeze or the Apricot or the other ones that they're doing now. That always kept the lights on. But then what they did is they used that flow, that cash flow, to try and then produce award-winning, world renowned, like basically as good as any beer you could get in the world would be Full Moon Pale Ale was a classic American pale ale until they ended it last year. Their Old Deuteronomy barley wine, again seen as one of the best barley wines in the country. So they leveraged the sales from the fruit beer that were popular and people wanted to buy, and they used it to try and make seasonals and some other core product that were of renowned quality that craft beer people, that beer geeks, flocked to. right? And that was the way that so they were able to both build a reputation while keeping the lights on. And that, you had to do that in the 90s. You couldn't just do a rotating series of IPAs back then. Your business wouldn't survive. So I think they really helped show in the early years what it takes to open a successful brewery.
I was a member of the Edmonton Home Brewers Guild, and a few of us started to think we were pretty good brewers and won a few awards, etc. And started to talk about the idea of setting up a microbrewery. So at that time I was working for the province, and the province was in a downsizing mode for civil servants, and was offering money to leave. So it looked pretty interesting. I guess there was an opportunity there, I thought. So a few of us got together, and a couple of us did a little tour along the west coast of Canada and the US. Talked to a whole bunch of different breweries, brew pubs, because we weren't sure whether we wanted to start a brew pub or a microbrewery. And at the time there was quite a distinction in terms of licensing. So a brew pub could only sell on premise. They couldn't package beer. I think they could package beer for off sale, but primarily it was just a pub that brewed beer. Or a microbrewery, which was not allowed to sell beer on premise. It could only wholesale beer, and was allowed to do a small amount of retailing out of the front. So we had to figure out whether we wanted to be a brewery, or a microbrewery, or a brew pub. And frankly, there wasn't really any distinction between microbrewery and a brewery. It was, we were taxed at the same level. The requirements were the same. It was just they were small, so we called ourselves a microbrewery. But at any rate, so we did a bit of a touring around the West Coast and figured out pretty early on that a microbrewery was the route to take. Just because everybody that we talked to in brew pubs said, first and foremost, you have to be a good restaurant. Because people will come back for the beer if you have good food, but not so much if the food sucks. So, not knowing much about food, we decided to do a microbrewery. So initially there were three of us that were looking at doing that. One of them dropped out, and a fellow by the name of Richard Cholin and I went ahead with the project. So I guess it was about June of 1994, I resigned from the province. They gave me some cash to leave, and I put that into the brewery. Richard put about some money into the brewery, and we started off on this big adventure to create Alley Cat. So we ordered equipment from a company in Victoria, or I guess Saanich, called Specific Mechanical, which I think has built tons of breweries around. Ordered our equipment and found a spot. Again, because we weren't allowed to have a tap room or anything, we looked for somewhere that was inexpensive, but still sort of central in the city. So we looked at a bunch of different locations, looked up in the Yellowhead, looked along Calgary Trail, and ended up just off 99th Street. We found a good spot there. So still close to White Avenue and downtown. So we set up there. I think our lease started in, I think here, August, I believe, of 94. Equipment started arriving in about September. We had to do some renovations to the building. And by December, we had equipment in place and we're starting to brew. Did a few test brews. I think we had a little bit of beer out by the end of December, but really didn't start selling beer until January. And it was tough. So I guess what we hadn't counted on is maybe it was hubris, but we had assumed that if we brew it, they will drink it and purchase it, but not so much. We started off with an amber ale and a wheat beer, an unfiltered wheat beer, which I think were quite good beers. But the unfiltered part of the wheat beer caused us a lot of trouble because people would get it and return it because it was cloudy. Everything that was around then was filtered. And I think we were the first folks in with an unfiltered beer. There were probably a few, trying to think, maybe commercially, a few Belgian beers that were unfiltered, but really there wasn't, people just weren't used to that. So we ran into trouble with that early on. That was an experience, I guess. So early on, we dropped that beer probably after probably might have kept that beer around for 6 months, maybe. And then we brewed an apricot ale. That was our first seasonal beer, and it took off like wildfire. So that was, I think, what we probably became known as, or known for, was that apricot beer, which was oddly named Apricot. So with Apricot, it was a little bit of a leap of faith. We just wanted, I mean, we were still in the phase of, and I guess Alleycat was always a brewery that tended to experiment a little more, and we tended to brew beers that we liked, thought that other people would like, obviously. But so Apricot came around by because when we'd been working on the brewery and we had done a tour of our suppliers. So we'd gone out again. Most of our suppliers were west, so we went out west, and we ended up coming across from, I guess, Idaho into BC, and there was a little brewery along the border that had an apricot flavored wheat beer, and we loved it. We said, "Oh, well, someday we gotta try something like that." So when we decided to do a summer seasonal in '95, we did a bunch of test batches, and we thought we really should try to do this apricot thing because we really loved it. And after lots of trial and error, came up with what we thought was a pretty good recipe and put it out there, and consumers really enjoyed it. And again, it was a little bit, at the time, considered a little bit out there because people would say, who puts fruit in beer? And we said, well, the Belgians have done it for a long time. But given that there were very, very few Belgian beers available, general population didn't know about it. But for whatever reason, the beer took off. People loved it and accepted the fact that there was fruit in it. For a little while, we actually described it as trying to think now, I think we called it a beer cooler or something along that line, just in the script on the bottle, just to try to explain what it was. But abandoned that. I think there were some regulatory concerns about calling it that. So at any rate, it became one of the beers that we were well known for. The other beer that we designed was a pale ale called Full Moon, which was one of the first, I think, pale ales that was available in the province. I think Big Rock had made one. But this was a little on the hoppier side. It was using North American hops, so it tended to be more citrusy. And that beer was originally brewed as a contract beer for a brew pub that had started up called Taps, which was between Calgary Trail and Gateway. And when they finally got their equipment up and going, dropped that beer, so we kept it and turned it in and started selling it ourselves as Full Moon. So anyway, that's the first year. The volumes that we produced at the start were tiny. I'm trying to think here. The first year, maybe we did. Oh, if we did 900 hectoliters, 600 hectoliters, something like that, it was pretty small, and it was a tough go. I mean, we weren't making any money. In fact, we were bleeding cash. So the first couple of years were very tough, and after I guess year two, my business partner decided that he wanted out, and so my wife, Levon, bought his share, and then we turned it into a family business, which I think made it a little easier in many ways, although my children disliked it because we had business meetings at every dinner table, although they certainly understood the business. At any rate, so Levon was working in corporate Alberta, and it was about, I guess, year three that she actually quit her job and joined the brewery full time. And it took a while. I mean, it was a tough business, and there weren't very many microbreweries around or brew pubs. I mean, here in Edmonton, prior to us starting, there had been a brewery called Boccalino on Jasper Avenue. It was an Italian restaurant with a brew pub attached. There had been, I'm trying to think now, what are the other breweries? There was Flanagan and Sons, which had taken over another brewery or bought out a brewery that had gone under. So there weren't, and I guess Brewster's had just built a brewery in Edmonton. So there wasn't a lot of us around, and the regulation in the province for breweries was tough. So we realized early on that we needed to do some lobbying, and thank goodness, I guess I had a background in government, so I understood regulation, understood how government worked, and a few of us got together and decided to form an association and lobby for some tax relief. I think we paid the same rate as the large breweries at the time, which was, I believe, 98 cents a liter. So given that a 6-pack of beer, I think, was selling for about probably $6 at the time, $7, $2 of that was going to the province. So it was tough. There wasn't much margin there. So we started lobbying the province to adjust the tax rate, or as they called it, the markup rate. And it took a while, but eventually we convinced them to roll it back a little bit. It still wasn't tiered. It was just, I guess tiered in the way that there were two tiers, as I recall. So the sort of commercial rate and then the small brewery rate. So yeah, those first years were pretty tough, and I'd say it probably took us about 5 or 6 years before things sort of settled down. But by that time, there were other breweries that were opening across the province. Still, not much in the way of other breweries in Edmonton. Edmonton was sort of slower to develop breweries than Calgary, primarily Calgary. There were a handful of breweries there. And trying to think who opened up in Edmonton after us. We were by ourselves for a long time. It was called Maverick, was the original name of it. And Maverick lasted just a few years, and then I think Gene bought the equipment and kept it open as Yellowhead, which I think operated a little better than Maverick had. We always had I thought, a really good dynamic at Alley Cat. I think people thought it was, I hope they thought it was fun to work there. I mean, I'm sure there are a few that didn't enjoy it, but over the years there were quite a number of people that came through that worked for us and ended up in either with their own breweries or in the industry. And in part, I suppose that's because there weren't a lot of other breweries around to work in. But yeah, we trained lots of folks, and there was at the time there was no place to go to learn to brew. So it was very much you know you go work somewhere and learn by doing. So it's almost like an apprenticeship. Yeah, so the recipes were in collaboration with my partner. After he left, I did most of the recipe writing. Although we always tried to involve staff, so there was when we came up with seasonal beers, it was the staff working together and tasting things and coming up with ideas about what might be a good beer style to work with. We always encouraged all our brewers to brew small batches. So we were always experimenting, brewing little bits of this and that to try it, see what it was, what we could come up with. So it was, I'm going to say, certainly, I guess I was responsible for what we put out there eventually. But there was a lot of collaboration internally in terms of coming up with recipes. So when we decided to do a brewery, obviously we needed a name and a logo. And we tried a bunch of different brewery names with friends. So I think River City Brewing was one that we talked about. Another one was North Saskatchewan Brewing. Oddly, people said, "Oh my God, you can use water from the river?" It's like, yeah, well, what do you think comes out of your tap? At any rate, but we wanted something that was just a little bit different because we were planning to brew beers that were not your standard, at the time, lager. And for whatever reason, came up with Alley Cat. There was no, my first partner, Richard, lived in South Edmonton. And for whatever reason, there were a lot of feral cats around where he lived. So I suspect that to him that meant something. But yeah, we wanted a name that was just was different, wasn't necessarily, didn't sound too corporate. And came up with Alley Cat. And when we tried it with our friends and neighbors and stuff, they liked it. Then the next issue was to come up with a logo, and that proved to be very difficult. So we contracted with a firm called, I think it was called Studio 3, Way U, who's done a lot of logos and stuff around Alberta and Edmonton. In fact, he was the fellow who, in one of the Olympics, came up with the logo. It was a peace dove, and I forget which Olympics that was. At any rate, so they came up with a bunch of different logo ideas, none of which we liked. None of which we thought worked. And finally, I think Way took it over on himself to come up with one and did the original Alley Cat logo, which was basically sort of in just letters that looked like cat hair. And I think he spent an entire, as he said it, an entire 12 hours doing this because each little cat hair was its own vector. So it was insanely complex to build. But yeah, anyway, so that became our logo. And I think it worked well for us. It became because it was very different than anyone else's logo. It didn't look particularly corporate. So I think we were pretty happy with that. Yeah, so originally we had two beers, as I mentioned, and we did seasonals. And then it became apparent that we needed a blonde beer of some description, so we came up with Skona Gold, which was done as a cream ale originally, so different than the current Skona Gold. But the number of beers that we did sort of had more to do with production capacity. So we couldn't manage very many brands. So I think we sort of came to the conclusion eventually that four different beers was kind of the maximum we could do, and that took a few years. So our original part of our problem was capacity. So initially, we had hoped to sell more draft beer than packaged beer or bottled beer. But it became obvious early on that the draft taps in the city were pretty much owned, and I use that advisedly, by the big two brewers, and it was very difficult to get in on draft. There was a lot of nonsense going on. The province would occasionally fine them a little bit, but it was tough to get draft taps. So we realized we needed to bottle. So the first bottling machine we had was this little inline filler called a Maheen, which we bought off a defunct brewery in Yellowknife, I believe. Been set up to fill 650 ml bottles. We rebuilt it so it could do 341 ml bottles. So yeah, so part of the problem with doing very many brands is we just didn't have the capacity to fill that much beer, because this machine did 4 bottles at a time. I think if it was really rocking and rolling, it might have done, I don't know, I'm trying to think here, in an hour, or sorry, in a minute, you might have done a dozen bottles, if that. That probably, it was a crazy machine. It was, you manually fed the bottles in, had to rinse the bottles. So it was a slow process and very manual. So yeah, that was the issue early on, was just capacity. So we had this little 4-head filler that we used for quite a few years, and then realized if we wanted to expand at all or brew more beers, we needed to get a rotary filler. So we bought a little 12 spout rotary filler, an Italian-made machine, off of a brewery in Toronto. Yeah, so when we first started, craft beers were usually in 650 ml bottles. So we actually manually filled 650 ml bottles, and then realized that really the market in Alberta was to the smaller bottle size, 341s. And there weren't a lot of cans. The big breweries were doing mostly bottles at that time, I think. I could stand to be corrected, but bottles were a big thing. And we managed to get included. There's a huge system for the management of beer bottles, nationally and provincially. And we managed to get into that system. So it was basically it was a good package size for us, and it was economic. The it was I don't know how to describe this to make it sense to people, but the you had to have a own a pool of bottles, and to purchase that pool of bottles was very expensive because it was quite a number of bottles. So we managed to come to an agreement with Labatt's. So we didn't have to own a pool. We could just buy fresh bottles, and then they would buy the the used bottles. So when we started up, there were two big breweries in Edmonton. There was Molson and Labatt, and I we really didn't have much contact with them at all. Labatt's paid a small amount of attention to us, but I think they saw us as more of an annoyance, but didn't really see us as competition. I mean, we had a few odd interactions with them. We had local VPs from Labatt and Molson show up at the brewery one day to talk about. There'd been an issue about. So initially, the going way back, the province controlled draft sales. And this would have been before our time, but Zalicat, but the province would decide which brewery got to sell draft beer to which hotel, or well, I don't think there were even pubs. So and so that changed by the time we started, but the big brewers still had their kind of division of places that they would sell. And at one point, there was a bit of a scrap between the breweries Labatt and Molson, over the division of these, taps. And so they came up with this idea where each brewery would be allowed to have a certain number of taps in each establishment. And they came to visit us, and to see if we would be on side for this plan. And my question was, well, where's our tap? And they looked puzzled and said, well, you wouldn't have a tap. So, yeah, so we really didn't have much contact with them. I, in terms of the bottles, I think that was just done. And so they're going to stutter here, but there's a separate system for the way the bottles are gathered, and so that's kind of the way we got in with Labatt. So I don't know that, not sure that it was ever directly Labatt's idea to purchase our used bottles. But yeah, so we had very, very little contact with Labatt and Molson. We did hear rumors occasionally that back in the day, that Apricot was the favorite beer in the QC department at Labatt. So I don't know if that's true or not. Yeah, so at any rate, we managed to get involved with that. So the bottles were sort of the package that was in demand. Slowly that changed, and I think one of the mistakes we made was to be slow getting into cans. We probably should have done that a few years earlier than we did, and part of the reason for the cans is that it became, there was a company out of Calgary that started building canning machines that were usable or affordable and worked for small breweries. And they really pushed cans. And then just the market changed, became more can centric. I always liked glass. I thought it was I don't know, I still like glass for a bunch of reasons. I think the beer is better out of glass. You don't have to worry about, in a can, you've got the top of the can that's open with the bottle. The cap covers the top. The Especially early on, the ability to fill cans or to fill bottles at a higher quality level was better. Thing initially was, well, all along was we tried to use local ingredients wherever we could. And so when we started up, there was a malting company that started up about the same time in Alex, Alberta, called West Can, which later became RAR. So that's where we got our malt. There wasn't any. So when you make beer, there's multiple kinds of malt used, but there's something called a base malt. So the base malt is usually a 2-row barley that's been malted. And in the case of apricot, we actually used wheat in it as well, so as a base malt. So base malts were available in Alberta. So West Can did the malted barley. Canada Malting in Calgary did wheat. There was also another malting company in southern BC that we bought malted wheat from. But the specialty malts, so crystal malts, black malts, Munich malts, those sorts of things, all were imported. And we bought those, I think, primarily through Canada Malt. So we got like our crystal malts and our I think the company was Hugh Baird out of UK that malted those, and then we bought them through their Canadian distributor, which was Canada Malt. So what we saw over time was that there were, towards the end or of my time with Alley Cat, there were more local maltsters starting up, and I think that's been an awesome thing in the industry, is to see all these local guys producing local specialty malts, which was something that we never had the opportunity to use until towards the end of my time with Alley Cat. And I suspect now that they use primarily specialty malts that are locally produced. So our hops were all out of Yakima Valley initially. We used a few European hops for some of the seasonals maybe, but primarily everything came out of the Yakima Valley. And it wasn't until probably, I think maybe 10 years ago or a dozen years ago that we saw hops begin to be brewed grown in Alberta in small quantities. But in my time, we bought hops from one of the original hop yards, which was called Northern Hop Girls. There we go. So we bought some of their hops, tried to help them get going. And I know there are a few other hop yards now in Alberta, but breweries go through a lot of hops. And they're pretty picky about the characteristics of the hops as well, because obviously that's big part of the flavor profile. The other thing you need for hops is consistency of supply, consistency of product. So I think it's going to be a little bit of a long road for local hop producers. But it's great to see. The small malting companies that have started up have certainly changed the way specialty malts are sold in the province or used in the province. So I think certainly we're all about the craft, but we were also treated as a serious business. And I'll give credit to Lavon for that part of it. She had an MBA and certainly was focused on the business side. But in to a large degree, I think our longevity was just, guess we're refused to give up. We were just kept trucking along, and there were years, especially early on in the years, that we probably should have put it to bed and said, let's try something else. But we were obstinate and just kept going. So I think, and yeah, and I mean, Levon was good making sure that, suppliers got paid or had agreements with suppliers to give us a little bit more time. And I got to say, especially in the early years, the suppliers were spectacular. There were some pretty lean years, and they were willing to give terms, willing to work with us. So we always were very careful about treating our suppliers with the utmost respect. And I can't think of any suppliers that we didn't have really, really good relationship with. And so it's in that regard, it was a bit of a team effort, I guess. Yeah, so eventually the province changed rules so that breweries were allowed to have tap room. Initially, we were allowed to have a tasting room. And I know it's going to be hard to believe, but we actually had to have a sign-in book. So if somebody came into the brewery and wanted to taste the beers, they had to sign a book saying they were there to taste beers. Often wondered what happened to that book, but at any rate, and we were allowed to do only 4-ounce samples. And it stayed that way for quite a while, but eventually the province changed the rules so that we were allowed to sell off sale. Or sell, shouldn't say off sale, sell on premise. But for I think most of the time that was a fairly recent change, probably, I think 10 years ago, maybe, if that. So our tap room developed very slowly just because it had originally been tasting room. Always had a lot of fun with that because the 4-ounce sample thing was something that we would often not pay attention to. Actually had AGLC inspectors show up one time at one of so we used to have parties whenever we would roll out a new beer. And we would just open up the doors. People could come in and taste beers. We weren't allowed to sell anything. So we would sell these 4-ounce samples, and often it would be just beer glasses. So when we got inspected, an inspector showed up at one of our parties and told us that we were over-serving. We weren't allowed to do full 16-ounce servings. So we filled up 4-ounce cups and let people pour them into a large glass. So it wasn't us; it was the customer. But yeah, anyway, that it took a while. That was a good thing to see the province change the rules so there could be tap rooms. I think that's helped a lot of breweries because it gave breweries the opportunity to have some cash flow. Initially, we were not allowed that at all. I mean, everything had to be off sale or wholesale. Oh yeah, I mean there were always mistakes made. We started a barrel program at one point, and so I can't remember how many barrels we had with beer in them that we were souring in them. And I mean, there was an example of a mistake. When the beer had been in the barrels for however long we wanted it in there, we tasted it and thought it was far too sour and dumped it. And in retrospect, that was ridiculous. I mean, it would have been an awesome beer. Should have blended it. So it was a waste there. I mean, we had QC issues a few times and ended up destroying more beer than you can imagine. But no, I don't know. I think we're pretty happy with most of the decisions. I mean, I think part of the business is just moving ahead. And, as I think some business guru once said, as long as a mistake doesn't kill you, it's fine. So yeah, sure, there were missteps. Like we probably should have been into cans earlier than we were. But no, I can't say there's anything that we were really, any massive screw ups. At some point, you need an exit plan, right? You can't carry on forever. So my children were not interested in carrying on the business. Both of them had worked there at times, but really wasn't their thing. So that wasn't an exit. There's just not much. Weren't very many breweries that sold. I mean, you'd see the odd sale, but for the most part, there wasn't a lot of trade in small breweries. So what we'd decided that we would set up with a management group. And so we tried to develop that management group so that we could have the opportunity to step away. I mean, we were getting older. And then just sort of out of the blue, we had a few offers come in, just who knew? Like, had no idea. Just like I was at a wedding in Las Vegas and got a phone call from some guy in Toronto saying, "Hey, we're interested in buying your brewery." So it's like, oh my God. So at any rate, we worked through that process, which was a big learning experience. So that deal didn't work out at all. And so then it became apparent that there might be some opportunities, and talked to a few other people, kind of put the word out there that we might be interested. And then eventually, just out of the blue, we got a call from the guys that bought the brewery eventually, and they said, "Hey, we're interested." So, I mean, it just sort of fell on our laps as much as anything. But our exit plan had been to either sell or to just set it up so that we could step away and be absentee owners for the most part. Well, I think in terms of a brewery, you're selling in many ways not only the physical plant and the brewery, the ability to make beer, but you're selling a brand as well. So I think we had a very, very strong brand, and I think that's what appealed to the guys that bought it. I mean, it feels really good to see that they're doing extremely well. I mean, they're awesome folks. I mean, Cam I'm sure you guys have talked to him. He's a great guy, and I think he's got a good plan for the brewery, and he's got good staff. So it's nice to see that it's carried on.
I'm Cameron French. I'm the owner of Alley Cat Brewing Company. So Alley Cat is Edmonton's original craft brewery and oldest craft brewery. So we are the fourth oldest in the province of Alberta. Started in 1995. So originally founded by Neil Herbst. He and his wife were the owners up until February of 2020, when myself came in and took over Alley Cat. Neil stayed on to help with transition for a while and to keep the tradition of Alley Cat going. Since then, we've continued to brew many of the same beers, but have also introduced new twists on Alley Cat. We are a very fun and approachable brewery and like to try to appeal to a very wide crowd, in which we specialize in fruit beers, but we also have a lot of other beers as well that we offer. Alley Cat's always been located here at our 99th Street location in Edmonton. We operate a tap room and brew everything in-house here as well. Back then, there wasn't a whole lot of competition when it started in '95. It's continued to grow, and we've seen Happy Beer Street, which is 99th Street here, push forward, and there are now, I believe, 7 breweries here with more to come. So it's kind of an exciting time. We like to get together and host different events throughout the year and different collaborations as well. Overall, the craft beer scene here in Edmonton and in Alberta is something that's continuing to grow. We've seen a great example of that this year with Alley Cat's work with the Edmonton Riverhawks. So being one of the first major sporting stadiums to be exclusively craft beer, which was a huge announcement this year that we made. And we're going to be continuing that going forward. So Alley Cat was the main beer there. And we brought in a few other breweries throughout Edmonton that we collaborated with and had different beers on location at all the games as well this year. Craft beer in general, just an exciting time. We offer so many different types of beer, different styles of beer, just different iterations that we all put together and we think about, and people are really liking that local feel, that local ingredients that we use, the local products that we produce, and that's really what's driving people, and we're seeing that growth in the market here in Edmonton. So over the past 3 years or so, we've seen a lot of changes in the brewing industry as well, especially in the craft industry. One of the biggest ones obviously being a change that was forced upon all the breweries is COVID. Just due to that, there was a lot of breweries that were tap rooms and keg models that were getting people into their buildings. However, that changed with a lot of closures, forcing people to move into cans, which helped grow the canning side of the craft beer industry as well. Alley Cat had always been in cans. We were fairly well distributed throughout the province and continue to be so, but that is one thing that we've seen other breweries switch into. They've either brought on canning lines or brought in mobile canners as well, just to help get that beer out into market. And now that we are seeing a shift back, we are getting people back in tap rooms, back in restaurants, which is great to see, and we're getting back to those kegs going out the door and people coming in for pints, which is good to see as well. But cans are still moving quite well as we move on. So with more and more craft breweries coming on, we're seeing good growth in the craft industry. It is definitely more competition, but it's healthy competition, I think, which is good. There is always the difficulty of shelf space, but the craft section is still continuing to grow, which is great. We're all seeing our cans on shelves. It's excellent. Overall, the craft scene is, like I said, still growing. So the market share for craft is getting bigger and bigger. We're seeing that on restaurants. They're wanting more local. So we're seeing more local taps throughout various restaurants, bars, golf courses, curling clubs, you name it. More and more craft and local beers are showing up on the scene. People want that locally sourced, locally brewed beer, which is excellent to see for all of us craft breweries. Overall, it's a healthy growth. We're all very happy about seeing that. We operate our tap room here in the 99th Street location, as many breweries do. It's just a great place for people to come, sit down, have a pint, try our new stuff. Some stuff isn't on shelves or at restaurants. We just sell it at the tap room, so you get to try the one-offs, the specialty brews, which is great. People like coming and enjoying a pint where it's nice and quiet, patio to sit on. You can bring dogs to a lot of patios, which is great. It really just offers people that chance to come into their local brewery and support the breweries. And obviously, too, we have takeaway beer, which people can grab from here. And then, since there are so many breweries on the Happy Beer Street location, we often get people biking location to location, come have a pint at each one, take the scooters up and down the street. So it's really just a chance for them to get to try a number of breweries all within a very small location. So one of the biggest challenges that we've faced, and a lot of the breweries have faced, is definitely supply chain issues. And that has been something over the last 3 years, and we still continue to always battle with that, I guess. During COVID times, we saw supply chain issues with cans. Most recently, we actually, again, another unintended and unavoidable supply chain issue was the port strike. So sometimes you're getting items coming in from somewhere else, and that delays sea cans moving, and whether it's coming from overseas or not, it still delays trucking, it delays cans coming from somewhere, it delays who knows it, but trucks might be tied up or cans might be tied up, which has a rippling effect throughout the industry. And ultimately, supply chain and maintaining enough inventory on hand is one of the biggest issues that us and a lot of breweries have all seen going forward. So it's something that we all have to deal with and just make sure we're on top of that. So a big thing with Alley Cat is, like I mentioned, local is a big piece for us. We like to try to source ingredients local. We have approximately 20 employees, give or take the seasonality of the business. And all of that is here local in Edmonton. So you're seeing Alley Cat sourcing local ingredients, buying local ingredients. It's staff and employees. So if you're coming in here purchasing Alley Cat product, we are then turning around and keeping that here in Edmonton, here in Alberta. It's all a local scene, local beer, and majority of our beer is all sold here in Alberta as well.
All right, my name is Chase Gordon. I'm the production manager here at Alley Cat. I've been here about 15 years. So the beers we typically make, we have 7 core beers that we make all the time. Quite a few of them are fruit beers because the Alberta market really does enjoy fruit beers, and we've become quite good at making fruit beer. We have a brown ale and a pale ale as well, so we still do have some hoppy options. And then we make some seasonals every year, so we always have a summer seasonal, a winter seasonal, and we make a beer called Pumpkin Pie every September, October, and that always happens because people love the pumpkin pie beer that time of year. And then outside that, the brewers, we get total freedom to make 4 beers every year. So doesn't matter what sales or marketing want, we get to decide what we want to make. And then the process for brewing seasonals is a collaborative process. So then we'll have Cam, the owner, sales and marketing, and we'll design a beer, test it. We'll always test it, sit down, we'll taste all the beers with everybody, decide what we want to make or what we want to change, maybe make some more test batches, and then we'll scale up from there. Generally, we want to do that to make sure that, we're getting a product that we like, because in the end, we want to drink it and we want to make sure it tastes good. And if we think it tastes good, then we hope the market's going to think it tastes good. I would say we kind of look at what everyone's doing, but it's more in the sense that we just go drinking, especially up Happy Beer Street. It's easy to go, and we like to go see our friends up Happy Beer Street and drink their beers too. And it's, we like to do our own thing, but we may draw inspiration from a beer we had from, if we were on holidays. I often go drink beer on holidays because it's a completely different market, and maybe just get some inspiration or unique ingredient ideas to produce, a beer that's not gonna be the same, but it might spark, that creativity. So for when we decide on what beers we're going to make for different seasons, definitely we are taking that into account. In the winter, we like drinking darker beers, maybe something a bit stronger, but definitely more flavorful and darker. In the summer, we're definitely looking at producing lighter, easier drinking, especially when it's really hot. You don't typically want to drink a heavy stout or something like that. So for summer, we're definitely looking at uh, producing a lighter, easier drinking beer for hot days and for patios, because patios aren't open in the wintertime, and you're looking at to drink on a patio in the summer. So we're definitely thinking about that when developing beer styles. Yeah, so the summer we're for sure flat out from about March till mid-August, and then volume starts tapering down through September, October, and January and February being our slowest months because there's no patios. It's after the Christmas season, so things are definitely the slowest kind of January and February. Yeah, so for ingredient sourcing, the biggest kind of by weight thing we buy is malt. And we're very lucky in Alberta and kind of Western Saskatchewan. We grow a lot of malting barley and wheat. So there's, two big malt houses in Alberta that are buying in, Alberta product and malting that here. And there's some new craft malters that have started up in the province that are growing their own barley and wheat and malting it on the farm, and they're producing some nice, unique styles of malt that we can purchase here. So we are starting to get a lot more variety of barley that we can buy, malt barley that we can buy in Alberta. So for one, the malt is a nice, good one and an easy one to get. Hops are a bit tougher. There are hop farms that are started up here, so it is becoming a little better. But we, in September, we run the risk of frost, so that becomes an issue for growing hops. And those are the two big ones, like malts and hops. Generally, you can get hops from all over the world. We try very hard just to buy from kind of Washington and Oregon because it's the closest to us. So from an environmental perspective, we're not getting all our hops from Germany or the UK where they have to come across the ocean. We might buy very small quantities for a one-off, 10, 20 kilos, but the hundreds and hundreds of kilos that we're buying for everything else are coming from the Northwest US. In terms of our size, yeah, we're to get custom malts made. A couple of the small malt houses will do it if we want it. But honestly, they're making great malts as it is. So we haven't really explored that as something we'd like. But the small guys, yes. The big guys, no. They malt in one batch more than we use in a year. So the big guys definitely aren't going to make us a custom blend. But the small guys, yeah, for sure would. Yeah, the Edmonton city water, we're very lucky. We have very high quality water in Edmonton. And we're far enough from the mountains that it's very stable water year round. The salt content is very stable. So we're not having to worry about, testing our water for the salt year round. But yeah, so we are very lucky. It's very good water. It's, slightly hard, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. Yeah, so for fruit, our best-selling fruit beer, typically is apricot, and we've been making that beer since 1996, and it's something that we're known for. We started producing a beer with mango in it called Mangalorean a few years ago, just as a summer seasonal, but it was a huge hit, so we just kept making it because people wanted it. So those two, mango and apricot, are our biggest ones. We also make Main Squeeze, which is a grapefruit ale year-round, which does well. And then, the brewers, we just released a prickly pear key lime goza. So it's, a slightly sour wheat beer with prickly pear and key lime. So, our fruit supplier does have a wide variety of fruit. So for the volume that we produce every year, we have a brew house that we can make 2,500 liters at a time. We'll do that twice a day. In the summertime, we're brewing every day. And then as winter comes, we're brewing 3-4 days a week. The vast majority of that volume is going out to the provincial warehouse. We keep some here to deliver in Edmonton, but the vast majority goes to the provincial warehouse for anyone in the province to order. So yeah, like I was saying, our brew house is about 2,500 liters, and then our fermenters, we have 5,000 liter fermenters, so 2 batches of wort are produced to fill a fermenter. The beer will sit in there between 14 and 20 days, depending on the beer style. Then we'll move it to a bright tank for carbonation. And then from there, after our microbiological checks are completed, we'll either keg the beer into 50-liter and 20-liter kegs, or we'll can the beer. And we probably can about 60 to 70% of the beer. It depends, like summer, there's more kegs for sure because there's patios that are open. So maybe it's more like 60% of the beer in the summer is in cans, the rest is in kegs. And then, yeah. For the artwork on the cans, we have an in-house marketing person who does some of the artwork for our one-offs. We also hire local artists to do our other one-offs, like the Back Alley Brews. And then for our core beers, we hired an artist so that we had nice, consistent branding across all the core brands. So naming beer is always a really I'll say fun, but it's a hard thing to do because you'll come up with a name and somebody's already used it. I don't come up with them because I'm very bad at coming up with names. So we usually put it out to all our staff and we get a running list going and then we'll choose one from there. But naming beers is a tough thing.